The Supreme Court is set to decide a question at the very core of American government. A question that could alter the balance of power for generations to come. Who truly controls the power to tax and regulate trade in the United States? The President, acting swiftly in times of crisis, or Congress, the body designed to represent the will of the people? For over 2 centuries, the Constitution has made Congress the gatekeeper of trade and taxation, granting lawmakers the authority to shape the nation's economic destiny and protect American interests. But in 2025, that foundational principle faces its greatest test yet, as the nation grapples with new global threats and economic uncertainty. The case, Voss Selections versus RAS, challenges President Trump's sweeping tariffs on goods from over 90 nations. These tariffs were imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a law originally intended for national emergencies but now at the center of a fierce legal battle. Critics warn that this move represents a dangerous expansion of executive power, allowing the president to bypass Congress entirely and act unilaterally on matters that affect every American household and business. Supporters, however, argue that in a fast-moving global economy, the president must have the flexibility to respond quickly to threats and protect American jobs, industries, and security interests. The Supreme Court's ruling will not only decide the fate of billions in tariffs, but also redefine the delicate balance of power between the White House and Capitol Hill, setting a precedent for how America responds to future crises. As the justices prepare to hear arguments, the nation waits in suspense, knowing that the outcome will shape not just American trade policy, but the very nature of democracy and presidential authority for decades to come. To grasp the stakes, we must return to the nation's founding. The framers, wary of unchecked executive power, gave Congress, not the president, the authority to tax and regulate commerce as spelled out in Article 1, Section 8. This power of the purse was designed to check presidential ambition and ensure economic policy reflected public debate and consensus. For over 2 centuries, presidents proposed trade policies, but Congress enacted them into law, creating stability and predictability. The current administration's use of emergency powers to bypass this process marks a radical break from tradition. Now the Supreme Court must decide, will it uphold the framers' design or allow the executive to claim powers Congress never intended to give? At the center of this legal battle is a powerful tool, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. Passed in 1977, IEPA was designed to give presidents the ability to act quickly in the face of foreign threats, like terrorism, hostile governments, or sudden attacks on the nation's security. The law was never intended to serve as a broad instrument for reshaping economic policy or managing global trade disputes. IEPA was crafted as a precise tool, a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Its original purpose was to freeze assets, block transactions, or sanction rogue states threatening the United States. It was never meant to be used as a sweeping weapon to impose tariffs on goods from nearly every country in the world. Over the decades, presidents have gradually expanded their use of IEPA, stretching its boundaries in response to new global challenges. But until now, no administration has tried to use it to unilaterally impose tariffs on such a massive scale, bypassing the usual checks and balances. In fact, the word tariff is nowhere to be found in the text of IEPA. The law's language is silent on the issue, raising questions about whether Congress ever intended for it to be used this way. Many legal scholars and constitutional experts argue that Congress never meant to hand over its core power to set tariffs, a power explicitly granted to the legislative branch by the Constitution. By interpreting IEPA so broadly, the administration is effectively turning a targeted emergency law into a shortcut around the Constitution's careful separation of powers, raising alarms about executive overreach. If the Supreme Court upholds this interpretation, it could set a precedent allowing any future president to declare an emergency and sidestep Congress on major policy decisions, not just tariffs. This case is about much more than trade. It's about the very foundation of American democracy, whether emergency powers can now eclipse Congress's fundamental authority to make laws. The Supreme Court's decision will not only resolve this dispute, but also define the boundaries of presidential power for generations to come. President Trump declared a national emergency over global trade imbalances, using IEPA to launch tariffs on goods from over 90 nations. Unlike past uses of IEPA, this move targeted not just rivals but close allies, Germany, Japan, Canada, disrupting global supply chains. The administration's 50% tariff on Indian imports sent shockwaves through markets and provoked threats of retaliation. U.S. customs duties soared, with most costs falling on American businesses, not foreign exporters. Companies faced a stark choice: absorb losses or pass costs to consumers, fueling inflation. Everyday Americans paid more for essentials, while small businesses struggled to survive. The tariffs, justified as an emergency measure, created a new economic crisis at home. The fallout has been immediate, severe, and deeply controversial. The administration defends the tariffs as a necessary correction to decades of unfair trade, claiming they protect jobs and boost the economy. Supporters argue tariffs force other nations to negotiate and bring manufacturing back to the U.S., even if there's short-term pain. Critics, including economists and business leaders, call the tariffs a hidden tax that stifles growth and punishes American companies. They warn that using IEPA for economic competition sets a dangerous precedent, eroding constitutional checks and balances. The administration's warnings of economic collapse if the tariffs are struck down are dismissed as scare tactics. For critics, the real emergency is the unchecked expansion of executive power. The legal fight began with businesses like Voss Selections, who argued the president overstepped his authority. The U.S. Court of International Trade ruled against the administration, reaffirming that Congress, not the president, controls tariffs. The government appealed, keeping the tariffs in place as the case moved up the judicial ladder. At the federal circuit, judges expressed deep skepticism about the administration's broad reading of IEPA. The Department of Justice warned of economic catastrophe if the tariffs were overturned, a claim critics called intimidation. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case underscores its historic importance. The justices will now decide not just the fate of these tariffs, but the future limits of presidential emergency powers. The tariffs have driven up costs for businesses across the economy, from tech firms to retailers, and even small local shops. Companies are now paying more for the materials and products they need, squeezing profit margins and making it harder to compete both at home and abroad. Many business owners have been forced to make difficult decisions just to stay afloat. For some, that's meant layoffs and hiring freezes, while others have had to cut back on expansion plans, stalling growth and innovation. The uncertainty has left entire industries on edge, unsure of what the future holds. Consumers too are feeling the pinch. Prices have climbed on everything from electronics to groceries, making everyday life more expensive for millions of families. Low-income families are hit the hardest, often forced to make tough choices about what they can afford. Meanwhile, U.S. allies have retaliated with their own tariffs, hurting American farmers who struggle to sell crops overseas, and manufacturers who face shrinking markets and rising costs. Global trade relationships have become strained, with negotiations growing more tense and unpredictable. The world economy has grown more fragmented and unstable, as countries rethink alliances and supply chains shift in unexpected ways. Decades of international cooperation are now at risk, with trust between nations eroding and new barriers rising. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the decision could send shockwaves through the economy. The government could owe over $100 billion in refunds to businesses, an unprecedented payout that might act as a massive economic stimulus, injecting new life into struggling sectors. The stakes are enormous. The court's ruling could reshape not just trade policy, but the very rules that govern economic power in America. The entire economic landscape could shift, affecting jobs, investments, and the way businesses operate for years to come. The outcome will ripple through households, boardrooms, and foreign capitals alike, shaping decisions and strategies on a global scale. The drama unfolding is about more than just trade. It's about the future of American prosperity, the security of families, and the nation's place in the world. At its core, this is as much a test of constitutional law as it is a battle over economic destiny. Voss Selections versus RAS is about more than tariffs. It's a battle over the soul of American democracy. A win for the administration would shift power dramatically to the executive, letting presidents use emergencies to bypass Congress on major issues. Legal scholars warn this could erode checks and balances, making the presidency more powerful and Congress less relevant. A ruling against the administration would reaffirm Congress's core authority and limit emergency powers to genuine crises. The decision will shape how America governs itself in the 21st century, whether by law and debate or by executive decree. The stakes extend far beyond trade, touching the very foundation of the republic. As the Supreme Court prepares its verdict, the future of American governance hangs in the balance. The ruling will set a precedent for how much power presidents can wield in the name of emergency. If the court sides with the administration, it risks normalizing executive unilateralism and weakening Congress. If it rules against, it will check the imperial presidency and force a return to legislative debate on major economic issues. The decision could trigger massive refunds and reshape the relationship between the branches of government. Ultimately, the court will answer, are the constitutional guardrails strong enough for today's challenges? The path chosen will define the balance of power and the character of American democracy for years to come.